when I first heard the score, I had no idea what this movie was about, and it does not make you think that's what this movie is about. But then when you realize what it's about, you're like, what a fucking brilliant stroke of genius the perspective of the score is. Because Jerry was like, in my mind, he is simultaneously scoring both perspectives of Gregory Peck and Laurence Olivier. He is crawling inside the glory of the Third Reich and sort of loudly proclaiming the genius of the German heritage while also making it into a kind of grotesque monster.
So we find ourselves back. If you're watching this video visually, are people doing that? I started watching it in bed, and Pam thought that was weird. She didn't think that the YouTube video was weird. She thought it was weird that I was in bed with her. She was like, "This is strange."
You're not welcome here.
But she goes. We were watching, and I was like, "Oh, I just want to see it for a second." And I was expecting her to go, "Okay, so you could stop." And she was like, "I love that you guys do this. I love that you do this." And she said it twice.
Keeps you out of her hair for a while.
Yeah, for a little bit. So this will be part 3.
Yep.
Of the Jerry Goldsmith venture, the Jerry Goldsmith
it's just of this particular slice of Goldsmith. There's so much more to discuss, but
we left off last time with Russia House and Branford Marsalis and the beautiful coupling of that jazz mixed with a lush orchestra, and then you said then for something really, really different, and then I said I gotta go.
Yep.
So
I am looking at this and I saw this weird audio at the end of that track, and I was like, what is that? And I remembered. So check this out.
Okay.
This makes me so happy. So Alien Nation was like 88, 87 that he wrote that score. Yep. Obviously was thrown out. Recapping from last time. He was able to repurpose that melody for the Russia House. And it was an all synth score, which means it was one where he was sitting around in his studio fussing with all of his DX7s and all the rest of it for hours and hours and hours. And so one of my dear, dear friends who sadly died a few years ago, younger, he lived a wonderful, amazing full life, but he was still too young, was Jerry's music editor, Kenny Hall. And they did 91 movies together. He considered Jerry his big brother. And so many of the stories I know is from endless lunches and dinners where I just sat there like this and was like, just tell me everything. I want to know everything you've ever experienced. And Kenny he loved being the center of attention, and he loved telling stories, and he was good at it. And he was like this so he loved going to the Smokehouse, by Warner, dude. And he's like old Hollywood, and he had been around forever. He was staff at Fox in the 60s. He didn't work on Planet of the Apes, but he was in the room with the orchestra while Jerry was recording that score in 68. So he'd been around forever. Their first movie together was a movie called Justine, which I think was 76. And he did basically every Goldsmith movie until Jerry died. And Kenny, I almost want to do a whole podcast, as in a whole show of just his stories, because he spent time, I was once in a room where John Williams was giving a masterclass it was a group of us composers, and Kenny decided to pop by to step in, and he walked in the door, and John Williams, professorial, even-keeled, never one to show a huge dynamic range of emotions, saw Kenny walk in the door and goes, Kenny! It was he was just a beloved guy in Hollywood land. And he and John Williams did work together on a few films. He worked with John Barry, and he worked with, it's just his stories are incredible. And sadly, he got totally out of the blue, very aggressive cancer a number of years ago, and just went from perfect health to gone in about 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Yeah, he thought he had pulled his back, and they started giving him muscle relaxers because he golfed a lot, and maybe it was more than a couple weeks, but I didn't even know he was sick. And then a mutual friend called and said, Kenny Hall died tonight, and I was completely blindsided. He, anyway, unbelievably wonderful guy. I loved him dearly and spent a lot of time that I spoke at his funeral. And so anyway, I'm looking at this file and I'm going, what is that? What is this weird, like, because the Alien Nation track ends and there's all this silence and then there's like a little bit of stuff. And so I hit play just right before we started here to see what it was. And it's a note they included of, it's Jerry leaving a message for Kenny in 1988. Listen.
Hello, Kenny. Jeez, what a f***ing boring day this is. Hope your day's better than this. I'm playing baseball here. Equipment's broken down. It's just, you want to hear more of my problems? Well, you do what you want. Goodbye.
It's like a message when he was working on Alien Nation and clearly got frustrated with his gear and just decided to leave. Because he would turn all the audio over to Kenny, who would be the one putting it, taking it to the dub stage and stuff. And so, it's so
now,
cool.
Did Kenny give you that, or did they keep that with the soundtrack?
It's actually because the Alien Nation score was thrown out, so the whole thing is like a archival, for the hardcore fans, like, let's find Jerry's long lost score that was never released because it wasn't in the movie.
Was it bootlegged, or did they finally actually officially release it?
No, it's a real release by, I think, Entrada, one of the film score specialty labels, put it out that does these kinds of things. And this is every now and again, like on the Patton, there's a Patton expanded release where the trumpets, the da na 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 na, they did a separate session just to capture all the echoplex trumpet things, and they put like a 10-minute track of just the raw audio of Jerry running it and rehearsing it with the trumpets and going, okay, take 7, and you hear them resetting the equipment and all the tape machines going, and they include shit like that because they know that me and 3 other humans on this fucking planet like that stuff. Yeah, you and
one of my favorite Beatles records. People are like, what's your favorite Beatles record? It was like Anthology. And the reason why is because they included all of like them working stuff out and like the rough versions of, and hearing Paul talk about, like he goes back and forth and he's basically teaching John yesterday. And it's like,
yeah, that stuff's so special. Yeah,
we referenced in the previous episode, we referenced Spring on the Night, and there's this one, I don't know if you're a hardcore Sting fan or if you're familiar with his music, especially that first album, there's this one thing that they captured, and again, we're talking about the beauty of just the time capsule of being able to see like Kenny Kirkland, obviously before he passed, Branford Marsalis, Omar Hakim, and I can't remember the 2 beautiful women that sing with him. They're just 2 or 3 actually, I think there are. But there's one part where the camera's just kind of off, lingering in somewhere, and they always ate dinner together. And so Sting must have like excused himself, and he's just sitting in there, and someone just had to be like, come grab a camera, he's working on something. And he's sitting down at the piano, and he's going, if I built this, if I built this fortress around your heart, and you hear him working it out, and then it cuts to them recording the song. You're like, I just watched that.
Can't believe
song.
they have footage of that. That's amazing.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, to me those moments,
on fire. Oh,
those kinds of things, to me are so much more interesting. The kind of fly on the wall voyeurism of the creative process than the sit-down interview style describing in a very documentary kind of way, this is what happened. Right. Like in a behind-the-scenes marketing video kind of way, I mean. Just to see those little glimpses. I someday
it's so
I
important
hope,
to the process. And so that I think that's brilliant that Is Entrada is the label that does this inherently, or are there other people that do this as well?
There's a couple labels. La La Land Records, Entrada. I can't remember who did that Alien Nation one, but it was probably... Entrada has released a bazillion Goldsmith albums, and including things like this, you know, rare, long-lost treasures, or for movies that are long forgotten, or, you know, Jerry did a lot. She just did so much that, you know, it's like he'll be releasing music for the next 100 years because they keep finding things. And... so yeah, I don't remember which, but one of those. I actually found the while I was sitting here, I pulled it up and added. Check out here's a little bit of the. It's a perfect handoff to where I want to go. The echoplex session from Patton. You can hear.
Playing these things, it's so hard just playing the one and letting go of it.
A894 S75.
Ugh.
See, there was Jerry's voice. working the gear.
Are they trying to get a delay? Yeah, so that's an actual tape delay.
It's an
they're
echoplex. It's an echoplex is basically a microphone and a speaker facing each other. And so the trumpets go da da da, and then it auto decays because it's basically caught in a feedback loop of itself. It is a delay through entirely analog means.
Wow.
And Jerry, they became very popular as like, you know, kind of a sci-fi thing and, you know, a way to, you know, use a sort of an alien sound. But Jerry had this insight of, you know, Patton believed he was a reincarnated Carthaginian soldier. And so he thought, what if, yeah, and that's true. Like in real life, he believed he was a very spiritual guy, and he even, I think, even a very Christian guy, but he also did believe in reincarnation, and he thought he had fought in thousands of battles over the course of human history, basically. And so Jerry wanted to capture that aspect of his personality and thought, what if there's like the eternal sort of trumpet fanfares echoing through history? And so just that became like one of the signatures of that score. And I love that there exists this just running recording of, you know, them literally just creating these effects.
One more of those, Jerry.
That's so dope.
Yeah, it's a perfect demonstration of how, like, this was 1970. You know, he was always experimenting with, you know, what else is there to try, you know, and so the way that's Patton is very relevant to both of the scores I want to round off this sort of series
Homage?
with. This whole kind of Jerry expects the unexpected. Yeah. The director of Patton was, you know, the closest that, despite the loyalty of Joe Dante and the fact that they did these wonderful kind of quirky comedies like Gremlins and The Burbs and whatever, the closest that Jerry had to a Spielberg, in the way that John Williams had this sort of golden goose director that just kept making spectacular films that gave him this incredible vehicle to write spectacular music that the whole world would enjoy. The closest that Jerry had to that was a director named Franklin Schaffner. And they did 7 films together, including Patton. And
also, sorry, go ahead. I'll say that.
Well, the first one they did was a movie in 1966 called The Stripper, which I actually don't know anything about, but it's kind of a drama, fun score, very kind of jazzy score. But the second film they did was the real kind of, you know, beginning of that, which was Planet of the Apes. And then Planet of the Apes was followed by Patton. And then the next film they did together was in '73. The Dustin Hoffman. No, you're thinking of William Friedkin.
That's what I'm thinking of. Sorry.
Franklin Schaffner.
He did a horror movie though, right?
The closest thing to a horror movie. Not really. They're all kind of dramas, or like the one I was going to say at 73 is Papillon with Dustin Hoffman.
Oh yeah.
And then after that was Islands in the Stream, and I think that was 78, which was Jerry used to say that was his personal favorite score he wrote in his career.
Really? Why? With the country sensibilities?
He really connected to the father-son story, and there's also a George C. Scott movie. I've never actually seen that movie, but I know the score, and it's just beautiful. It's on my list as I make my way through the Goldsmith body of work. I know the music backward and forward of his whole life, but it's funny how few of I've seen a ton of these movies, but he just did so many. But the next one they did, the last one they did was Lionheart, which was not terribly well received. It was a little bit of a misfire. But the one second to last film, which was in 78, which is just such a good period for Goldsmith. You know, you've got The Wind and the Lion, and then The Omen, and then
The Omen. That's what I was thinking of. Sorry.
Oh, The Omen's Richard Donner.
But I was confusing the horror that he did.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, no, yeah. That Jerry certainly did plenty of horror, but frankly, Schaffner's films were mostly not. But this one is a bit of an anomaly because it's sort of like a thriller that's almost a black comedy called The Boys from Brazil.
I know it.
So it's so fascinating because it seems like it's supposed to be a kind of darkly funny movie because it's very hokey and it has two of the greatest actors alive playing very kind of hokey parts because it's literally Gregory Peck and Laurence Olivier. And it's a film about, I'm just going to lay out some spoilers here. It's a film where it takes place essentially when it comes out, sort of contemporaneous, so late 70s. And it's about Laurence Olivier plays a Nazi hunter who is looking.
I knew it had to be Nazis. Anytime people do Brazil.
Yep, that's the thing. He's looking for people that escaped the Nuremberg trials, basically, and are essentially unprosecuted war criminals who fled, like high-ranking Nazis that never were held to account. Which I would assume that's a real thing. I've never looked into it, but that can't not be a real thing.
It absolutely was.
I mean, I know that there were people that were. Obviously, I know there were people that were famously hiding out, and there were rumors of Hitler having disappeared to South America and blah. But what I mean is the profession of like a Nazi, essentially bounty hunter, surely had to be a real thing. The Laurence Olivier character is what I specifically mean. And so he and Gregory Peck plays, Mengele, the like leader of the Nazis that he's trying to find. He's like the granddaddy of the ultimate catches for any Nazi hunter. And so the story is it starts off as kind of a murder mystery where somebody realizes like there's been a string of mysterious deaths and they all seem to have something vaguely in common. And I'm just going to spoil the movie because I don't know how worth it is to watch this film except as an artifact of history, of film history, I mean. Because basically what they discover is that there's about 80 clones of Hitler that are being raised, and Hitler's father died when he was a young boy. And so in an effort to try to raise these boys to be identical to the way Hitler grew up, they basically take these clones, they give them to adoptive parents, and then they kill the father at the exact age that Hitler's father. So there's this guy that's piecing together this odd series of murders that all seem weirdly similar, but have seemingly
recreate Hitler.
They're trying to recreate Hitler
genetically, but also experientially.
Exactly, because it's Nazis trying to basically figure out a way to bring him back, and so they're like, well, we can't literally bring him back, but this is the next best thing. We groom, and we're going to give ourselves about 80 scattered throughout the world.
He had broccoli every Tuesday.
Exactly.
And then, of course, he would have the sauerkraut on Wednesday mornings. Jesus.
So that's the premise. Funny enough, Brett Ratner at one point was going to do a remake of this movie. But yeah, probably a bullet dodged. But in any case, so it's a movie that's essentially about Hitler clones, and it's very kind of,
which was the original title.
it's very it's funny because it's a fun kind of thriller, and it's got some real kind of campiness to it. And yet it's also pretty dark. And so it walks a kind of odd tonal tightrope. But it's one of those where when I first heard the score, I had no idea what this movie was about. And it does not make you think that's what this movie is about. But then when you realize what it's about, you're like, what a fucking brilliant stroke of genius the perspective of the score is. Because Jerry was like, in my mind, he is simultaneously scoring both perspectives of Gregory Peck and Laurence Olivier. He is crawling inside the glory of the Third Reich and sort of loudly proclaiming the German, the genius of the German heritage, while also making it into a kind of grotesque monster. Because listen, I'll just leave it at that and hit play. Here's the main theme to the Boys from Brazil, one of my favorite Goldsmith scores of all time.
That 3/4 waltz.
It's a Viennese waltz. And I always feel like when I listen to this, something's not quite right here. Like, do you hear these muted, they're stopped French horns going in the center of this, where you hear them sustaining this very nasal tone? Right here. It's like something's under the surface. And those horn rips there. But there's a weird sense of humor to this as well that I think really gets the movie. It really understands, like, there's a little bit of a deliberate cornball to this movie. Despite its darkness. So here, listen to this figure.
Now minor.
That little... Say again?
It went minor, right?
Yeah, but that's not what I was calling out. The little bass line, this bum, 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 as this kind of undergirding figure of the waltz. One of the things that makes Jerry so brilliant is that, you know, main title sequence. Anybody can write a good main title sequence if they've got the craft of a composer. What's the brilliance of this is that Jerry, it was always, I want this to proliferate the DNA of the whole score. So hearing that little bum, 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 ba-dum, that's a waltz bass line. Like, I mean, well, hear how he turns it into kind of a thriller thing, just even in the main title, but nonetheless focus on that bass figure.
Yeah. Now the strings go from lush to horror, right?
Yeah, there's a real dissonance to it. But what I was starting to say is anybody could basically, you know, put like an end credit suite or a main title that says, okay, this is kind of our thesis statement, right? Here's the sequence of the film. But what made Jerry so special was that he would grab those ingredients and make sure that they work through the whole film, functionally, even in quiet dialogue scenes and everything else. So, like, check out this. This is just a piece from the score where this is the DNA of the score. It's a Viennese waltz turned into something maniacal and dark and scary.
Relationship between that brass and the timpani is just...
Oh, it's great. I'm going to see there's a whole bunch of snare while he marks time.
Yeah, but just then the delay in the snare. Did you hear that? Just the room.
Oh, yeah.
They're close, but they still have that slap.
Yeah, it's not how you would probably record a snare today. But yeah, it's like, it's still a waltz, you know? This is essentially a suspense scene in the film, but it's still that same score, you know? I love that, the bassoons and tuba together. It's just
what are those bumps? Is that trombones and it feels like bones and horns, but they're really, really low. Bum.
Yeah, definitely trombone. Well, that's bassoon.
That's bassoon and tuba, right?
Yeah, and double bass by the sound of it. But that's the low brass. That's you know, bass, trombone, and trombone. So yeah, the fact that the whole score, that was one of the best lessons I ever got, just listening to his music as a kid, and it was so informative for me. It was, you know, the goal was never to sound like Jerry, but the goal was to try and think like Jerry, where he would just look at a film and go, what sound can I create that feels like perfect for this story of a Nazi hunter discovering a plot to clone and raise Hitler boys that sort of evokes all the right things and can be extrapolated to cover every type of cue needed in this film. And it's just like, he just nailed it so beyond perfectly for this score. To me, it's just one of his great masterpieces. And it's so, who would think, big lush Viennese waltz for a thriller, essentially a murder mystery thriller. It's just great.
I did a cover. To me, it's a classic thing. I think the re-instrumentation, the revoicing of something that is if you take a song that was originally written on piano and you arrange it for guitar, it's going to be inherently different, and that was the purpose of it. Like I equate this to covers, right? I did a cover of When in Rome song "Promise," and there was something that I was specifically going for, but for me it was what if this is a super cheesy love song? What if we flipped it and made it something that's a bit more about almost a stalker? It's someone who is obsessed with someone, and so it instantly goes dark. And you take something that is written in a major key or written with a major progression in mind, and then you flip everything and you start using the minor thirds of stuff, and you really start changing the not only just the instrumentation but also the arrangement of it.
Absolutely.
And to me, that's the same thing that he's doing there. It's like, here I'm going to set the stage with this lovely whimsical thing that feels very familiar and very comfortable, but then all I have to do is literally change one note. And it goes from happy to sad, from comfortable to fearful. And that to me it's a very simple thing, but it is from a very complex methodology and way of thinking.
Yeah, and there's a deep musicianship informing that. And also he was the real deal as a film composer. He understood film. He understood the idea that I'm not just writing music. This music will be heard in its interaction with the footage. And so he's working as a partner to that footage. That was one of those things that John Williams, you can say near infinite positive things about him, but sometimes it feels like he's kind of paying, and this is an unfair thing to say because I've heard stories about how he works and he cares deeply about the film, but he does seem to have a certain amount of detachment from the footage. In a lot of what he works. And it makes for stuff that plays better on albums than probably a lot of Goldsmith stuff where you hear it and it's very clearly in service of the film. But
whenever someone has, and whenever someone's process is in service to the thing, right? Whether it's a show, a film, a game, I'm not going to knock it and say, you have to do this. It's like I've never understood them teaching jazz I had friends that went to North Texas. University of North Texas is a great school, especially for a lot of musicians come out of there, especially jazz musicians. And they have their different lab bands. And if you were in the 1 o'clock lab band, you were primo. You could walk around Dallas.
J.K. Simmons was your teacher?
Pretty much. It's hardcore. But in perfect example for Whiplash, it's how do you teach jazz, man? How do you teach someone the breaking of the rules? But it's not even the breaking of the rules. I've said this multiple times. Daniel Lanois, one of my favorite quotes from him, it's not about breaking the rules, but it's about ignoring them, which implies that you know the rules. So what I hear from you saying about Jerry is that he was someone who, not just in Russia House, but in everything he's playing jazz. Right? It's about, I know I'm not, that's why rock and roll is an extension of jazz. It's do what you're not supposed to do. Don't turn that guitar amplifier up past that number. If you do, it will break up. And that's where distortion came from. And so now you look at a Fender Twin and it's the thing really breaks up around 5. And it sounds so good at around 5. It's because what literally happened was inside of it, the tubes got so hot that they distorted the sound. And somebody first had to go, fuck it, I'm going to turn this thing up. And it's really loud. You never, ever want to be in the same room as a Fender Twin reverb past 3. It is deafening. And why they made it, it should just be a clickable thing. They did it all the way to 10.
Yeah. No, I think understanding that bigger picture is the difference between kind of good and great in a case like this.
But specifically the partnership that you're talking about between the film and the film, or the filmmaker and the composer. What do you do if you are less fearful than the filmmaker, than the creative director, than the showrunner? What do you do in that situation when you know that you are being bridled by their inhibitions?
I mean, you do your best. There are countless. I've dealt with that a million times. Every composer has. Sometimes it reaches a breaking point where you realize I'm not the right fit for this. And other times it involves you trying to figure out, how do I make them more at ease? Hans Zimmer said it best. He goes, when in doubt, show it to an audience. Let them be the judge. If you think I'm being crazy and you're worried, just get together 20 strangers, show them, see what they say, because they're all that we're working towards in the end anyway. But it's not easy. Sometimes we have to make compromises. Jerry certainly, there's one rather notorious story of him getting into a bit of a spat with the filmmakers on Mulan because there was one cue they couldn't agree on. And he had one thing in mind, and they really wanted something that was like very much of the moment and felt very cheesy to him. And was, he was trying to build this, kind of to our last conversation, he was trying to build something that was probably a bit more timeless, more traditional. And they were like, no, we want something that's very pop. And it kind of came to blows. He had to be talked off a ledge, and he finally gave them what they want. And to me, it's without question the worst cue in the score. And I'm sure Jerry felt the same.
Do you think that's because he did it and that his heart wasn't in it? Or do you think that that's because
I never liked it
inherently was bad?
I never liked it even before I knew that story. In fact, hearing that story was a light bulb moment from people that were there that day when he literally stormed out of the recording session with the entire orchestra sitting there out into the parking lot going, fuck this, fuck these people. And they had to coax him back in because I remember when I heard it, I was like, this one cue just sounds nothing like the rest of the score. It's cheesy. It's suddenly very synthy, and it doesn't work.
So similarly, Tombstone to me is, we've talked about this, like the one before or whatever, where it's like Tombstone and Silverado, two best Westerns that ever made, in my opinion, obviously, but it is, they're just so well constructed, well executed, top down, frame one to end credits. They're just perfect. Even Tombstone, which has just like the nonsensical, no real reason for it, Robert Mitchum VO at the very beginning. Doesn't really need it. He doesn't anywhere appear in the middle. The regulators. I was like, why is this? Is that Robert Mitchum? What is he doing?
Was that like a Blade Runner story where they added, VO?
It had to have
fear
been.
of the audience. Yeah, I didn't.
We got to onboard you real quick so you understand who the Cowboys were.
Right.
And why these guys are bad.
That's a total fear decision on the studio part.
Yeah, but they're using a term, and to me, if you've never seen Tombstone, it's almost like you need to watch it twice. Once without that in the very beginning, and then once with it to see if it makes sense. But you get, when you hear Cowboys and that red sash, you instantly understand bad news. Not the typical ma'am cowboy. These are bad dudes.
Right.
But there's one scene in that movie that is awful. It is pure, objectively, it feels staged. It feels cheap. It feels wrong. It stands out like a sore thumb. And I was on set with Val Kilmer. And we got on really well and became friends. And I was talking to him one day about
Hey, what's up with that horrible scene?
Pretty much. we were sitting there. We were doing setups. It was going to take them a while, and we're just kind of catching some shade and talking. And he loves talking about Tombstone and the fact that he went to a specific dialect coach that was of a specific place. Like he's like the dialect that he had, and he specifically chose this, was a dead dialect. No one else talked like that. But he did it specifically because he wanted it to be an affectation. He's a brilliant actor. There's a new documentary coming out about him. I'm really curious to watch it.
I just saw it premiered at Cannes like today.
Val Kilmer is deserving of. He's an amazing human being. He's truly a genius. Food and water.
So what do you say about it?
So I said, we're talking about Tombstone. I said, there's one scene that just doesn't work. And he just kind of sits up. He's like, what? And I said, the night that Bill Paxton's character dies, and he just leans back immediately. And I said, Kurt Russell walks out, and he's got literal blood on his hands. And what's her name's character is there? You know, Maddie is there, and then also, oh gosh, I have such a crush on her. What's her name from China Beach? Man, I'm terrible. If I get stuck in a thought, me trying to think of somebody's name. What is her name? Her name is Dana Delaney. Oof.
I wouldn't have been able to help you. Sorry.
She's standing there, and he's literally trapped between two worlds. Okay, we get the blocking. We understand. He's walking out. He goes, no, get away. Get away. Don't you see? Don't you see? And they both, one turns and like literally just like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to do this now. She turns on her heel. She runs or walks away. And then Dana Delaney's character looks longingly at him, and she turns away. And it ends with like a long shot, and the rain feels cheap, and it just doesn't. It was like, you don't need this scene. And Val sits back and he goes, nobody has ever called that out. Let me tell you what happened. And that day, I'm gonna get the roles wrong, but like 2 people got fired. The first AD, I believe, being one of them, which is second to the director. Is the first AD. That's like the first mate on a ship. It's like, that's the XO. If that guy is gone, it's
a lot
chaos
of
on the set.
There's so much logistics that funnels through the AD that it's probably impossible to make a film, especially midway through.
For sure. And this was long into the shoot. There was other kind of surrounding weird political stuff that was happening, but like the prop master or somebody was it was a big fucking day on set, and they had messed up, and the machine that makes it rain wasn't functioning properly. He goes, so if you watch, it's only raining in half the shot. In the back half, it's not even raining. Oh, and he was like, that is 100%. Everybody was in a bad mood that day. Everybody hated that day, and it shows up on the set. It shows up on film.
My prediction was going to be that it was like a late reshoot that was inserted that had no business being there, or something like very inorganic that was put in there.
Reshoots? Honestly, man, most of the time, reshoots don't feel like it. They have so much attention that's being paid to.
Yeah, for sure. No, like the reshoots are crucial. I mean, some movies like Rogue One is a good example of a film that they did insane amounts of reshooting, and to me, that's probably in the post-Disney era of Star Wars. That's far and away my favorite film they've made. And so
Top
it's like
Gun, the scene in the elevator between Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis.
Is that a reshoot?
Total reshoot. They were like, we need more romance. We need to beef up the romance. The whole love scene, all of that was added because they were like,
I had no
it's
idea.
falling flat.
That's so
And so
funny.
they come back. Tom Cruise has longer hair. It's like, it's the weirdest thing. If you go back and watch it, you're like, why does this feel? But it works because that's what the story needed.
Funny.
So that's what I definitely think. And I don't know why I look at music as more emotive than performance for some reason. Maybe because
I think that's
it's more implicit, right?
Music is more abstract. Like you can't, with some very rare exceptions, you can't, for example, give expositional plot information through score. Performance
right.
can move you and teach you information you need. Score score is about subtext.
I don't know, man. I think that music can do the same thing by the very virtue of what the example that you just gave. You take one theme,
But it true, but it
one
can't.
cue.
I totally agree, but it needs something beyond just the music itself. Like, for example, you need to know the Viennese waltz as a product of the German Austrian history for that choice. You would never, if you've never heard of a Viennese waltz, you don't know anything about that history or anything, you would just read it as like an emotionally peculiar juxtaposition, but you wouldn't get the further subtext that Jerry is banking on you catching a hint of.
You have to know who the Nazis are to watch the movie.
No, actually you wouldn't. You would just need to know that there's bad guys making clones of an evil man. I mean, admittedly, it would be, you're missing a lot. I'm not, but I don't think that the movie is
But is there not a
unparsable.
language to music? Like, and this is horribly reductive, I get it, but like major is happy and minor is sad, right? So if I need to sell a sad moment, if I put a major chord progression into it, keep it in the key of C, and go 1, 4, 5, and never hit the minor, that's going to make you feel happy. But by the very same token, if all of a sudden I change it,
there's so many wonderful examples to disprove that, but yes.
like what?
One of my favorites of all time.
That's a minor.
The first minor chord is this.
You're playing Randy Newman right now, aren't you?
Oh, no, I wish. No, that's literally Tom Hanks looking back at the island for the first time, and it's 151. And then the 4. Back to the 5. Like, it's heartbreaking.
But when you did the walk down, did you not hit a minor?
No.
They're there.
You could maybe argue that it's
dum.
implying briefly an F minor, but I don't think it reads as F minor. It just reads
But-
as A flat with a walking bass. The F minor comes.
I also, I don't read that as, and this is getting into the whole minutia of the conversation, that doesn't read as sad to me, that reads as contemplative, which is going to be that legato.
Could be, but it's not
more-
happy.
It's not happy. But you could take that and go, I could take a cue like that and, okay, let's go into this. That specific moment to me is a near one-to-one example, as close to one of the things that I love about the David, the famous statue, is that the question that it even poses, I believe, on the plaque, is it the moment before or the moment after? Is he about to slay the giant, or has he just slain the giant? And to me, that moment, the
Like,
look
are we
on Tom
looking?
Hanks'
Are we looking
face-
at anxiety, or are we looking at triumph? In other words,
Oof. I think that's being too reductive. To me,
like going
And this
into
is
battle
why.
versus riding away from a battle are two obviously wildly
for
different.
sure. Right. But like I look at the David because you can't count the stones that are in his hand, or you can't see if there's a stone in the sling.
Right.
And to me, it is the moment after, and is that fearful recognition that I know that everything's about to be different. I don't know what that means, but I also just took a life, and I know that I will never be the same again. It's not the same as killing a bear. It's not the same as killing a lion. I just took a man's life, and they're yelling my name, and some are angry and some are happy, and all I know is that my life will never be the same again. And it's this wonderfully sad moment afterwards where you think triumph, no, sad. And so to me, that moment of him looking back and that is, as you have said and pointed out to me, that's the first time you hear music in the entire, the writing in that movie is so great, because how do you tell such a story with next to no dialogue? And then how do you compose and emotively drive all of these huge moments with no music? And to me, that moment right there could be read as contemplative, sad, despondent, reflective. I mean, there's so many words, but it's not just like, that's happy or that's sad, but it could be like, I made it.
I
it's
think
the same moment with David.
The complexity of the moment is the reason why I think it works, because there's so much complexity that the simplicity of the music gives you the space to project the complexity of the reality onto it, because
And the pace.
he's looking at a place that was equal parts his savior and his prison. You know, if it hadn't been for that island, he would have drowned at sea, and yet he couldn't escape it until this moment. So but he's probably more likely heading to his death. I did a whole video about this score. I'm obsessed with this score and this movie. And I will make an abrupt turn to the final score in this list, since we both probably have to leave soon. The final one, the one that inspired this whole playlist. We're finally here after 5,000 hours, and we're still, everything always just feels like I'm just getting rolling. But as a perfect testament to Goldsmith's kind of inventive, just bottomless well of creative instinct. I mentioned before that the echoplex session was a perfect segue unintentionally. I just brought it up since it came up in our conversation. But 1970 was a banner year for Jerry. You know, it was he kind of got robbed at the Oscars for that score. I think Patton may be the most.
Patton didn't win?
His only win was The Omen in '76. There were a few times where it seems like, how could he not have won? How could he not have won in '84 or '85 with Under Fire against Bill Conti for The Right Stuff? You know, to me, Under Fire is just clearly the better score. How did he not win? 1975, I'll give him. He wrote The Wind and the Lion, my single favorite Jerry Goldsmith score he ever wrote. But he was up against Jaws. You know, it's like, okay, you know what, Johnny, most iconic score probably of all time. We'll give you that one. But to me, 1970 Patton, he lost to a score that was not really, in my estimation, it's the same reason why, well, no, it's not the same reason, but it's kind of similar to Louis Bacalov winning for Il Postino instead of James Horner for Braveheart. In 1970, what won was Francis Lai for the movie Love Story. And I think it was because the theme became a chart-topping song, and it just everyone knew that song. But meanwhile, Jerry wrote, you know, same thing. I think it was The Little Mermaid. No. It would have been later. Beauty and the Beast that beat Basic Instinct. You know, Jerry got screwed by the flavor of the month. And this, again, no denigration to Alan Menken in particular, who was like one of the greatest living geniuses on the planet. But I don't know that he needed to win for score. He won for song righteously for that film. But to me, Basic Instinct is another one of just the all-time greats. In any case, so Jerry, despite not winning, everybody agreed Patton was a watershed score in the history of cinema. And to me, it is, despite the fact that I normally cite The Wind and the Lion as probably my single favorite Goldsmith score, I would argue that Patton may be the most perfect film score ever written by anyone of all time, because it's everything that you could want a score to be. It's subtle, it's bold, it's spotted brilliantly, it's stylized and unique, it's both intellectually rigorous and emotionally volatile and powerful. It's just like every metric, every lens I could imagine analyzing through. You know, does it make me feel? Does it make me think? It's just immaculate. The crazy thing, though, is it didn't lead to a million job offers, and he got really fucking down. And he became pretty alcoholic. And at some point he goes, fuck Hollywood. Like, you know, I write Patton and no one gives a shit. And, you know, he never stopped working, but he thought he had turned a corner because creatively he clearly had, and somehow the offers didn't just flood in for all the high profile things. So for about a year he moved to London and just decided to hell with LA and moved to London, got engaged to a girl, ended up breaking off the engagement and marrying the woman shortly thereafter that was his wife for the whole whole back half of his life, Carol. But it was a dark, very unhappy period for him, like truly miserably depressed. And so while in London, he wrote this one score that he wrote there and recorded there before moving back to LA and moving in for a period to the, he moved into the, what's the hotel / like restaurant on Sunset?
Chateau Marmont?
Yeah, he lived there briefly. And so anyway, he went and did this movie also with George C. Scott, ironically off of the back of Patton, but not the same director, called The Last Run. That is not a terribly well-remembered film. It was not super well received at the time. I finally watched it not that long ago. It's actually very typically 70s because it's such a brutal and dark film. It presents itself as kind of a caper movie and then it's sort of fun. And then it's just like typical 70s. It just ends in the most bleak, kind of sort of depressing and cynical way. And the basic storyline is that George C. Scott plays this retired heist getaway driver who was like the best getaway driver. And now it's been 10 years and he has moved to Portugal and bought a sailboat and discovered he sucks at sailing. So he just leases out his sailboat to a local fisherman and he sits on his ass bored out of his mind. And his only relationship really is with a prostitute. And so he's basically just wasting away the end of his life and not happy. So when an opportunity comes up for, after a decade of being retired, one final score as like a getaway driver, he takes the job. That's why the movie's called The Last Run. And so he goes and he picks up this guy who's being sprung out of jail. And then he discovers that this guy is a real monster. But they have to go on this road trip to smuggle him across Spain and eventually back into Portugal where he can put the guy on his boat and send him off. And there's obviously more to it that I'm skipping over, but it's about like they kind of bond and connect. And then, spoiler, forgive me, I'm just going to spoil what happens. He makes it to the end. And, at one point they pick up the guy that Rickard, who broke out of jail and who he's smuggling across the Southern Europe. They go and pick up Rickard's girl, and she kind of starts to be a little bit flirty with George C. Scott's character. And then at some point it's like, she's like, I'm not going to leave him. And even though, I know he's horrible, but I'm not going to leave him. It's like, I didn't expect that you would. And so he's kind of still resigned to, I'm not going to get any favors in life. And we realize also he lost his family, his kid died and all this stuff. And so finally they get to the end and they get essentially double crossed, and he gets killed. George C. Scott gets killed saving this asshole who doesn't care about him, and him lying there dead on the beach. The guy goes, he's been dead for 10 years, and just walks away, and it rolls credits. And it's just so like brutal. Like he gets no redemption. His one final act was helping this total monster get out of jail and go continue to be a monster in the world at all cost to him and no cost to the bad guy. So it's, in that way, it is a very typical 70s film. And so Jerry, I remember I didn't know much about the movie, and I remember I always listened to the score, and I always fantasized, what could this movie possibly be about? Because it was such wildly original music. And it's funny how Jerry, in his state of horrendous depression and unhappiness, wrote something that's just exploding with life and vitality. Because on the one hand, it's very 70s, and it's not him doing a 70s shtick. It's him living in his moment, the same exact way that Alien Nation using those synthesizers and Gremlins using those synthesizers were him living in the 80s. You'll hear the funk bass line and the sort of quasi disco, slightly ahead of the curve on disco, but like the hi-hat, like you'll hear that it's clearly of the 70s. Like he was just being a contemporary, and yet he also brings this kind of like almost Godfather-y mafiosa vibe to it. And but yet also for reasons that there's no justification. He just decided this would be interesting. There's like this very heavily Bach harpsichord quality to it as well, where it all just mashes up into this thing where you go, I don't know where this idea came from, but it's amazing. And he also wrote, I think, one of the most gorgeous themes he ever wrote. So here's the main title, the opening of the last run.
Is that harpsichord?
That's like a zither or like a hammered dulcimer, like you would play with little mallets on a flat surface. The alto flutes.
Flutes or like the mellotron almost.
Like you hear the electric bass, like it's, that's just...
Right. Acoustic guitar.
And I love how distant the strings sound, right?
The strings way up high happening.
It's like
over
a
here.
tree only, Truly one of my favorite cues he ever wrote.
The relationship between the harpsichord and the bass is pretty cool. Clarinet.
It sounds like an English horn to me, but it almost sounds like a saxophone. But I'm pretty sure it's an English horn because it's just playing higher than normal for an English horn.
Strings again happening back left.
Yep, very hard pan. So, and check this out. They wrote a song that they didn't end up using. It's only on the album that Steve Lawrence, like of Steve and Edie, he sang it and listened. Tell me this isn't just gorgeous. This is the song that they produced off of that theme that they just didn't use it at all.
I suppose when it's all said and done, I suppose when I've made my last run, as I look back at all that my life has been, the memories I review by one begin. You don't need every dream to come true. If it's right, then just one dream will do. I have tasted life and I've had the good with the bad. I have fought like a man and I've won right to the last run.
That's just beautiful.
Dude. It's also a very smart or interesting choice to make a lead bass.
I've had the good with the bad.
So as my finale to this playlist.
Hell yeah, dude. What a way to go out.
No, I got one more. That's one.
No,
that's
you
even,
can't.
I have to. It's the single best car chase cue ever.
Right, but that's your act 2. You don't end on the. You don't.
I got it, man.
And one more. Marvel. This is what marvelous changes. That's the post credit.
No, man, this cue is something I have been dying to share with you for years because to me it is the thing that I heard that was one of those, like, as a teenager when I came across this by just buying a record sight unseen. I was like, the combination of things in this piece of music is like a Rubik's Cube. And if I can figure out how to do this, there's nothing that can't be done. And it's just, It's the scene of the guy breaking out of jail. There's nothing significant. It's just literally a guy running. And Jerry tells this story far beyond what's on screen. It is truly one of the most original pieces of music because it's all these elements injected with steroids. Listen to this. It's a bitchin' harpsichord part too.
Fucking metal.
And I love the dulcimer grabbing the high note, of each little run.
At 2/4 time.
And he basically quotes Bach. And I love the timpani. Think about
that. Sounds like jazz, by the way.
It's
you know what I
fucking
mean?
brilliant, man.
It sounds like someone just vibing.
how badass is that piece of music? I don't think there's any synths in there.
At that very last bit.
No, I think that's just a recording artifact because it's an old tape. I think I hear the warble that you're kind of talking about, but I think it's just the strings. Because just remember, 1971, the synths available were not exactly like, playable instruments quite the same way as the 80s. But think also just the context. He was a miserably unhappy person when he wrote that piece of music, and he just looked at the movie and goes, this, I'll just do what I think the movie deserves, and then just gave us that.
Yeah, I think, dude, that's the. You said it's so life. It's not like juxtaposed with his feelings. I think it's an extension of it. I think that to me sounds, especially since you contextualized and said this is just a man escaping. I'm like, fuck yeah, you write that kind of cue. That's exactly what you would write. It's like all of it, just anger. There's a lot of complexity to it.
Yeah, I never thought of the.
You know what I mean?
All the kind of noodling as kind of almost like trying to vent. That's an interesting psychoanalysis.
There's a song by oh my god, Billy Idol. No, Billy
Eilish.
Billy
Joel.
Whew, damn.
I was running out of Billy's pretty quick, so I'm glad.
The album that Billy Joel did after his divorce, he stepped away from guitar, or stepped away from piano and stepped up to guitar. And there's a song called Frustration where it's just like, dude, he is wailing.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, That's what you do. So I that's why I look in this entire time of COVID. Diamonds are made by pressure and time. This is what nature reveals the fact that this is what we do in times of adversity. We create the most forward-thinking music, games, novels, films, stories. This is what we do at this time. And if Jerry can take this dark, depressing, why not me moment and go, watch this shit. And if for no other reason or justification, but the fact that 30, 40 years later, two bearded dudes will be sitting here on something that seemed like a magical time, machine to be able to talk to each other, to go, this is my favorite cue. That's fucking awesome.
I couldn't agree more. Can't put a better button on it than that. We are in his debt, including his misery.
All of us are.
For sure.
Like every musician, every artist, they are the scapegoats for our sadness, and we lay them willfully down on the altar to be bled out so that we can understand beauty. We can understand that's all that artists are. Is they're sacrificial lambs for the rest of the non-creative.